Chapter 1.3 Getaway. Tiffany waited in the co-pilot's seat. She tapped one of the 3 screens of the Phoenix's navigation console, known as the Navcom, and it came to life. One screen displayed a 3-dimensional globe that represented their home planet of Tragus. Tiffany swiped her fingers across the screen, and the globe expanded. She centered the screen on a small blue dot, which marked the Phoenix's location. A thin green line rotated around the blue icon like the hand of an old clock. With the lines every cycle, Tiffany saw glowing green dots, representing objects, moving closer to the Phoenix. If their parents were on their way, why would Oliver lock them out? Tiffany counted 12 dots. Who else was with them? Or coming after them? Her mind was still fuzzy with sleep. It wasn't thunder that had woken her, but exploding flares. Plus, Oliver was out of control. He had come crashing from the woods like a savage, bleeding and crazy. She looked at the middle screen of the Navcom, which showed the status of the Phoenix's systems. Engines were online, reactors powering up. The communication system was activated. All airlocks were sealed. Oliver was really going to launch the Phoenix without their parents. Tiffany glanced back at her brothers. They looked nervous, sitting in their seats, all strapped in. And why shouldn't they be nervous? Had Oliver ever flown something as powerful as the Phoenix? Her parents, skilled pilots, had run into a myriad of problems even flying a small craft. The last screen displayed route and destination information. The destination was a planet called Yard de Ises, and her dad had already programmed the variables for the flight. That provided her some comfort. The seconds ticked by, the dots moved closer. Then Oliver burst into the bridge. "Tiffany, are all the systems loaded?" "Oliver, what are—" "No questions!" Her brother scrambled into the pilot's chair and stepped in. "Soldiers are coming!" "Soldiers?" Tiffany, Mason, and Austin shouted in varying tones of concern. Oliver ignored them and tapped one of the pilot's consoles. With a few more taps, a thundering buzz filled the air. The overhead lights flickered as the engines drained power from the reactors. The Phoenix began to shake while the engines fought to produce enough thrust to lift its weight. Oliver gave a hard pull on the flight controls, and the nose of the ship rose slowly. The shaking grew more intense, and then all was dark. Oliver brought the nose of the Phoenix down. The bridge glowed ominously each time the console screens flashed on and off. "Oliver, what about Mom and Dad?" Tiffany cried. Oliver was silent. Tiffany started at a bright blue flash. It lit the cabin, and a loud boom rang through the ship. More flares exploded outside. The Phoenix lurched forward as Oliver adjusted the vector of the thrusters. A scraping noise pierced the bridge as the tops of pines scratched the sleek silver underside of the ship. As the Phoenix gained altitude and speed, it slid smoothly into the cloudless night sky. But the peaceful travel lasted only a moment. Acceleration immobilized the kids in their seats as Oliver yanked the flight controls backward. The Phoenix vibrated, shuddered, and then shook violently, pointing straight up. "A little longer!" Oliver pushed the throttle forward with all his might. The Phoenix needed every ounce of thrust. "My head's spinning," Mason whined in his seat from the second row. Austin looked at his twin. "It feels like someone's tightening a rope around my chest." Oliver tapped the screen to raise the ship's cabin pressure. A siren rang out. Tiffany looked at the co-pilot's radar screen. "Starfighters!" "How many are there?" Oliver asked. 2. Oliver turned the controls hard to the right. The Phoenix rolled and then dived. Tiffany gasped as her whole body was thrown sideways. She grasped the armrest of her seat. "What are you doing?" "Ute!" Oliver stared forward with an iron grip on the controls. "What's Ute?" asked Mason. "Urgent tactical evasion," Oliver explained. "Hold on, I'm taking us into the canyon." "What?" yelled the twins. A deep, narrow chasm littered with outcroppings stretched through the woods behind their home. It was the same crevasse Oliver had crossed to lose the soldiers. But it's too narrow for the Phoenix, Mason exclaimed. Oliver shook his head. Not for me. I've flown several canyon missions. Weren't you in a simulator? Asked Austin. Where the worst consequence was failure flashing across the screen in red letters? Mason asked. Yes, but I only failed twice. The twins looked at each other with mirrored expressions of anxiety. As the Phoenix dived, the canyon wall swept up around the silver ship. Oliver yanked the controls left, spinning the Phoenix and narrowly missing a boulder. Tiffany gasped and gripped the armrests on her seat more tightly, her nails digging into the leather padding. Only one of the fighters followed into the canyon. The other remained overhead. Why haven't they fired on us? Asked Austin. Because Mom and Dad are... Suddenly, Oliver twisted the controls, spinning the ship to avoid a large protruding rock. Oliver! The canyon is narrowing! Tiffany yelled. I know! Oliver waited until the last moment and spun the Phoenix on its side, squeezing through the narrow gap. The pursuing pilot didn't have time to react, and the wings of his starfighter were ripped off. Oliver looked at the screen showing the view behind the Phoenix. He saw the pilot eject while the starfighter plummeted into the river. A parachute opened, and the pilot floated down to the water. He wouldn't be chasing them any longer. One down! Hovering above the canyon, the second fighter waited for the Phoenix to emerge. Oliver! The canyon ends up ahead! Tiffany screamed. With every second, the solid rock face grew larger. There's an opening, and it's just large enough for the Phoenix, Oliver explained. What? Tiffany turned to Oliver. In there? It's the only way to lose him. As they approached the cave, Oliver slowed the Phoenix. That pilot's going to have to decide between 3 options. Wait at the entrance of the cave, fly to the other side, or fly through behind us. I'm hoping he follows. Tiffany looked at Oliver in disbelief. He had a plan, but would they die while carrying it out? Oliver dropped the Phoenix's altitude, almost gazing at the water below. The fighter above dived. The chase was on. A giant mouth, teeth bared, was open before them. Tiffany still couldn't believe her brother was really going for it. The black void swallowed the Phoenix smoothly. Tiffany switched on the ship's lights, illuminating the darkness and revealing hundreds of stalactites and stalagmites. Hold on, everyone! Oliver ordered. Turn around! Tiffany shouted. We can't! This is our best chance to lose him! The hourglass-shaped formations approached. The Phoenix was yards away when Oliver jerked the controls hard right. The ship spun onto its back. The seat harnesses dug into the kids' shoulders as gravity turned to smash them against the ceiling. The cabin pressure wasn't high enough. The Phoenix shuddered fiercely, and Oliver's sweaty hands slipped from the controls. There was a loud crash, and a siren rang out. What happened? Asked Tiffany. Oliver cocked an eyebrow. The left wing rubbed up against a rock. Rubbed? Tiffany accused. That felt more like a direct hit, Oliver. She touched a red icon flashing on the console before her. Several alerts flashed across the screen.
Left wing impacted. Communication transponders offline. Stability sensors offline. Wing integrity compromised.
Oliver, there's a lot of damage, Tiffany exclaimed. Can't worry now. Oliver pulled hard on the controls, barely making it around a large bend in the cave. The ship shook violently as he tried to straighten it. Her knuckles white, Tiffany's hands burned as she retightened her grip on the armrests. What's wrong? There's some variance in the controls. It seems like more than variance, called Mason from the second row. Oliver hoped his brother was mistaken. Tiffany watched the small fighter come around the corner. He made it through. That's all right. I'm going to lose him up here. How? Asked Austin. We're approaching a cavern with several waterfalls. How do you know? Asked Tiffany. Dad brought me here once. Flying into an expansive cavern, Oliver pulled back on the controls, and the Phoenix obeyed, slowing. He pointed to a waterfall pouring from a narrow crevice, high in the cavern wall. There's our escape. That gap looks too narrow, called Mason. We aren't going in. We just need the waterfall. Oliver increased the Phoenix's thrust, and Austin leaned forward in his chair, eagerly awaiting Oliver's next move. Mason closed his eyes and crossed his arms protectively over his chest. "Here we go!" "Where?" asked Tiffany. "Up," Oliver answered. "Up the waterfall?" Mason squawked. "Awesome!" Austin cried and pulled his harness straps tighter. Tiffany closed her eyes. The nose of the ship brushed the falling water. Oliver pulled back the controls and angled it upward. Water plastered the windshield, and the Phoenix's speed dropped suddenly. Oliver moved the thrusters to full to fight the impact of the water. The Phoenix deflected the water into a spray, leaving a clear path for the smaller ship to follow. Oliver counted down quietly to himself until his pursuer was directly underneath. With a swift pull on the controls, the Phoenix flew out of the falling water. The full force of the waterfall pounded into the starfighter, sending it into a powerless downward spin. As it slammed into the pool below, water erupted into the air. The small glass canopy opened, and the pilot climbed out before the craft was swallowed by the water. Tiffany and the twins broke into cheers and praised Oliver. The Phoenix circled the cavern once, and Oliver gave a wave to the soaked pilot below. Then he made a U-turn and headed back toward the cave entrance. "Why are we going back?" asked Austin. "If they're reinforcements, they'll probably try to cut us off on the other side." A few minutes later, the Phoenix and all aboard were out of the cave and into the canyon. "Let's get out of here!" Pulling back on the controls, Oliver took the Silver Star Cruiser high into the sky. The Phoenix began to shake, fighting gravity's hold on it. Higher and higher it climbed into the midnight air, and the dark blue night sky slowly turned pure black. Millions of tiny lights twinkled ahead, and with a final shudder, the Phoenix broke free of Tragues. Oliver instinctively activated the ship's artificial gravity. Seemingly free from danger, Tiffany ferociously interrogated Oliver. "What's going on? Where are Mom and Dad?" Frowning, Oliver looked her in the eyes and shook his head. "We aren't safe yet." Chapter 1.4 Hyperflight. Tiffany scowled. "Safe from what? The soldiers?" Oliver tried to deflect her questions. "Tiffany, bring up the coordinates for Mom and Dad's destination. They're probably pre-programmed." "They are," she said, then rounded on him again. "Did you do something at the academy?" Oliver glared angrily. "No, they aren't Federation soldiers." "Who are they?" Tiffany shouted in frustration. He'd been acting like a hotshot ever since he returned from officer training. "Please, we just need to get away from here." Oliver's voice cracked. Tiffany stopped her onslaught. What was going on? Not Federation soldiers? She'd wait, but she'd get her answers. The twins chattered excitedly behind them. "Mason," Oliver cleared his throat, "I need you and Austin to get Mom's journal. Tiffany, can you tell them where you left it?" "It's in the research lab on the circle table," she said harshly. Her frustration with Oliver was impossible to contain. Unfazed by his sister's attitude, Austin hopped out of his seat and disappeared through the doorway. Mason wobbled, and then he stood. "Whoa, my legs feel funny." Gripping the back of the chair, he shook his legs. He took a couple of steps and then ran for the library. "Hey, Oz, are your legs tingly?" he shouted as he disappeared through the hatch. "Okay, they're gone," Tiffany said. "Will you tell me what's going on now?" Didn't Oliver understand how frightening it was to not know what was happening? She took a cleansing breath. "Oliver." "Tiffany, I will tell you once we're safe. I have to concentrate. Oliver hesitated. "I've never done what we're about to do. I've never made a jump into hyperflight." Tiffany instantly understood. Oliver was scared. He really didn't know what was happening. She had to let him concentrate and try to help. She trusted he would explain things later, but it was still hard not to be angry at the situation. Using every ounce of her will, she exhaled quickly and forcefully and asked, "Oliver, what can I do?" "I need those coordinates," Oliver said. "Right." Tiffany nodded her head. A single tap brought up the coordinates. A small green globe with swirling purple blotches appeared and rotated on the screen. Several statistics about the planet popped up next to the moving image, including a name. The destination is Yarda Isis. Dad entered the flight plan yesterday at... Tiffany looked at the screen. 3. That'll make this a lot easier. But do you know why we might be headed there? Oliver asked. No, I don't, Tiffany said. She was cautious. I figured we'd be headed to Enerazon. After all, that's where the Archeos Alliance headquarters is. If Mom and Dad were headed to a dig site, they'd rendezvous with their colleagues at Archeos. This ship doesn't have any Archeos markings, so I don't think this expedition was being funded by them. I think Dad and Mom found something big. What makes you say that? Asked Tiffany. They've been withholding things from me. For example, they never mentioned the Phoenix. And this trip, usually I know where we're headed, who we're going with, and for how long. I suppose they shared all that information with you, though, Oliver said. Tiffany shook her head. No, Oliver, they haven't told me anything. That's why I was so interested in their journal entries, she explained. They haven't said much over the last 9 months. Oliver was skeptical of his sister. So they haven't told you anything? Nothing except for the usual, we're doing good, we're looking forward to seeing you soon. Oliver exhaled. Well, whoever attacked tonight must be the cause for their secrecy. Attacked? Well, not attacked. They broke into our house. That's why I took off. Mom and Dad ordered me to escape with you and the boys, Oliver explained. But seeing as how neither you nor I know anything about our parents' plans, I don't know where we're escaping to. Shouldn't we contact someone? Tiffany asked. Certainly the authorities could help them, she thought. Who? We don't even know these men or what they're capable of. Our ship isn't linked to Archeos, which makes me think we shouldn't contact them, Oliver said. So what do we do now? For now, we head to the coordinates Dad programmed. He and Mom had reason to go there. We'll have to piece it together. Tiffany dragged the image of the revolving globe to a box on the screen labeled Primary Display. I just sent you the coordinates. Oliver moved the numbers to a flashing blue icon that would activate the hyperflight sequence.
Please confirm the coordinates. 123.34x, 342.30y, 863.22z. Yar de Isis.
A computerized voice repeated. Yes, Oliver responded nervously. He gave Tiffany a half smile.
Hyperflight sequence engaged. Plotting course,
said the computer. Several applications popped up on the screen, displaying each step the flight computer was taking for the Phoenix's hyperflight. Tiffany, will you see if the twins have found anything? Oliver's tone was friendlier, but he didn't look up from the screen. We're going to go into hyperflight shortly, so have the twins come back. And hurry. All right. Tiffany unstrapped herself and headed for the library. Mason and Austin were busy searching the library's cabinets and shelves. It's not here, Austin said, clipping the strap back into place. Keep looking. It has to be here somewhere, Mason said. Where was it that Tiffany said she left it? I don't remember, Austin said, falling into one of the comfy chairs in the middle of the room. Something circle, I think. Did you check the table? Mason asked. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Well? Mason turned around and saw Austin relaxing, his feet on the circle table. Don't just sit there. Help me. I'm tired, Austin complained. I was awoken from a deep sleep, and rather rudely, I might add. Austin, we were just being chased by starfighters, and Dad and Mom weren't with us. Something is very wrong. Austin got to his hands and knees and began to search the floor. Are you worried? Mason paused, looking away from Austin. No. The thought of his parents put a knot in his stomach, but now was not the time to be scared. Oliver's got everything under control. Do you think our parents are dead? Asked Austin. Mason froze. That his parents might be dead hadn't occurred to him. But before he could even consider it, Austin shouted.
I think I found it.
Mason hurried over to his brother, who was using the table to pull himself up. With one look, he knew it was the journal.
That's it.
The twins' mom used the e-journal for everything. Her extensive notes outlined past archaeological digs and contained contact information and a myriad of other items. It was their parents' personal encyclopedia. If there was any tool that could help the kids, this was it. Austin smiled proudly and handed it to Mason, who pushed the button on its front. The device opened like a book, revealing 2 dark computer screens. Austin leaned close to Mason in excitement.
Turn it on. I don't see a switch anywhere. Maybe you tap the screen like the computers on the bridge.
Austin suggested. He should have thought of that. Mason tapped, but nothing happened.
Hey guys,
Tiffany said as she entered the room.
We found the e-journal.
Austin exclaimed, bouncing on his toes.
But we can't figure it out,
Mason admitted, and handed it to Tiffany. She took the stylus and began tapping on the left screen. Once in the upper left corner, once in the lower right corner, and then twice more in the upper left corner. The journal screens glowed to life.
Good job, boys, but we're getting ready to jump into Hyperflight, so we need to hurry back to the bridge. We'll look at this later,
Tiffany said. Wondering whether Oliver knew how to perform a hyperflight, Mason turned to Austin anxiously. But his twin was gone.
Where did...
But Mason didn't need to finish his question. He could hear Austin shouting excitedly as he ran down the corridor toward the bridge.
Are you ready, sis?
Mason hoped she'd tell him if she was scared, or if she had any new information from Oliver. Instead, Tiffany grabbed Mrs. Wick's tan canvas pack from the floor and took a quick look around the cabin.
Is everything secured?
She asked as she slid the journal into the pack.
I think so,
Mason responded.
Then let's go.
Although disappointed in her shortness, Mason followed Tiffany to the bridge without any questions. Austin told me he found the journal, Oliver said as Tiffany and Mason entered the bridge. Austin was already strapped into his seat.
Yes, he did.
Tiffany took the co-pilot's seat. Mason strapped his harness across his chest and looked at Austin, who was beaming. Everyone strapped in? Oliver asked. Tiffany and the twins confirmed, just as a red strobe light began to flash.
Confirm hyperflight sequence initialization. Projected course is clear,
the computer stated. Oliver touched an icon that flashed the word jump. Instantly, large blue numbers appeared on the screens, starting a countdown. Oliver hoped he'd done everything right. If not, there would be little left of them in a matter of seconds. The computer spoke again.
10 seconds to jump.
The twins double-checked their harnesses, and Tiffany gripped her armrest. Oliver tapped the screen again, and titanium heat shields slid down to cover the 3 sections of the windshield. The shields were meant for entry into an atmosphere, but also protected the family against the intense blasts of radiation that often flared up during hyperflight.
8 seconds.
Hold on, guys.
Tiffany turned back to look at the twins.
6 seconds.
All right, here we go. Oliver looked at the screen.
Oliver, what are those red blips?
Tiffany asked. Other ships. Oliver thought of his parents, wondering whether they were on one of them.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Instantly, the kids were smashed against their seats. A whistling noise filled the cabin. Austin covered his ears to block it out. The whistling ceased, and the pressure slackened. The kids felt the invisible hold release them.
Hyperflight stabilized,
The computer informed them. Austin exhaled as he slumped down in his seat, and then smiled at Mason.
What a rush!
Mason nodded, bent over, and stroked back his shaggy hair. He looked like he was going to throw up. For almost a minute, everyone was silent. The only noise was the soft hum of energy running through the thousands of wires overhead. Oliver sighed and looked at Tiffany, and then the twins. He was finally ready to recount the awful truth.